But with Austin Theory pinning Sheamus to retain the US title on SmackDown, that leaves him open to defend his title against somebody else at SummerSlam. And that someone should be LA Knight, who inexplicably was not on the show Friday night. He was in a dark segment before the show went on the air, which is ludicrous. But if the idea is for him to challenge Austin Theory, maybe they wanted to just get past Theory and Sheamus, get past that first, and then he'll be back on the show this week and they can start their program then. That's the optimist in me talking. Triple H's modus operandi has been not to overload the pay-per-views with too many matches, and that was his style in NXT too. If you watch the way he booked NXT, he kept most of those takeover shows to no more than 5 matches. Occasionally there might have been a 6th, but typically the takeover shows were very tight. They only had about 5 matches. If he sticks to that formula, I could see the US title being left off the card completely. Because they've been doing that with some of these events. They did it with Charlotte and Asuka before Money in the Bank. The match didn't happen at Money in the Bank. The match happened the night before. I could see them doing the same thing, having him defend the US title the night before on SmackDown. I hope both titles, though, both mid-card titles, can be represented at SummerSlam this year. We know they're not going to leave Gunther off the card. He'll be on the card no matter what. Hopefully they don't do that with the US title. But this is a good place to mention this because it made headlines this week. On his Kliq This podcast, Kevin Nash and his co-host Sean Oliver, who I just saw on the Law & Order, I'm going through all the old seasons of Law & Order. And I just got done with the season 16 finale, this from years ago. And making a cameo as a court clerk. He was the guy handing the docket to the judge. He's the guy who shouts docket number and then they read off the docket number. And I said, I know that guy. I said, it's Sean Oliver. There he is. So how's that for timing? I knew he did voiceover work and some acting. I never knew he appeared on Law & Order. But anyway, they were having a discussion about who might follow Roman Reigns as the next big star in wrestling. And people sometimes talk about who's the next Rock and who's the next Stone Cold. And that reminded Nash, like the light bulb went off in his head. It reminded him that he had something he wanted to get off his chest about LA Knight. He said, am I the only one that sees an absolute ripoff of The Rock to the point where he cut the promo on Logan Paul or whatever the fuck his name is? He said, yeah, stick it. The only thing he didn't do was say that he was going to turn the motherfucker sideways. Says, does everybody have amnesia? There's nothing original. Oh man, his fucking promos. Finally, LA Knight has come back as a white guy. So that's what Kevin Nash said. First of all, I don't think the influence of Stone Cold and The Rock on LA Knight can be in dispute. I've been talking about that as far back as his Eli Drake days in TNA, and then later on when he was in the NWA. Right? The example that Nash gave was probably the worst example of it. I agree. When he told Logan Paul that look, I got one of your bottles of Prime, and he was going to tell him where to stick it, he sounded like The Rock there. Friday night, in the dark segment at Madison Square Garden, he interrupted a Hit Row promo and then laid out Top Dollar and Ashanti the Adonis. He delivered a leaping elbow off the ropes that was similar to how The Rock used to set up the People's Elbow. And then even his blunt force trauma finish, which almost never looks good. He really needs to come up with a new one. He delivered that and it looks like he's going for the Stone Cold Stunner. So in that one segment, and WWE uploaded it to their YouTube channel, so you can go watch it for yourself. It was like he was channeling Rock and Stone Cold in the span of 30 seconds with those moves. So to answer his question, is he the only one that sees the resemblance? No. No, you're not. But to call him an absolute ripoff of The Rock is not fair either. And he said it in a way that came off as derogatory. The fact is, he's over. He's over. Whatever he's doing right now, it's working. You don't get a reaction like that in Madison Square Garden, or like the one he got in London when he was sharing a ring with someone like Pete Dunne in England, where Pete Dunne is getting booed and LA Knight is getting cheered. You don't get those reactions if you're not doing something right. And if you're going to borrow from someone, borrow from the best. Stone Cold and The Rock are about as good as you could get, I would say. If you're going to borrow from somebody, borrow from them. Don't borrow from fucking Salvatore Sincere. And if he wants to borrow from them and put his own little spin on things, like, the whole let me talk to you whenever he grabs the mic, then that's cool. I see nothing wrong with that. In TNA, he started doing the dummy thing. He had this dummy button. He would call somebody a dummy. He would hit the button. Maybe he should bring that back. Not the button, but the dummy stuff. Maybe he'll bring that back. But the idea that LA Knight borrows from The Rock and he borrows from Stone Cold, are the fans blind? Why are they going nuts for this guy? It's because they like him. They find him entertaining. He's charismatic. He's charismatic in a way that a lot of other people on the roster are not. So why hold that against him? Why say it in a way where it's like you're holding it against him? As if borrowing from others is some sort of sin. Some of the biggest... The entire fucking wrestling business is based on people borrowing and sometimes outright stealing from other people. Some of the biggest stars in the history of the business borrowed from stars that came before them. How many people do you think tried to emulate Ric Flair? Or Dusty Rhodes? There would never have been a Hulk Hogan if he didn't copy superstar Billy Graham. Jesse Ventura, he did the exact same thing. Billy Graham, he just passed away recently. I just got done talking about him, what a huge influence he was on so many people. No one more so than Hogan and Ventura. Look at Demolition. One of my favorite tag teams of all time, if not my favorite. People still call them Road Warrior ripoffs. Look, that may have been what Vince McMahon had in mind when he couldn't actually sign the Road Warriors, but no one can say the Demolition didn't get over doing a similar gimmick and that they don't belong in the Hall of Fame. Even Kevin Nash himself on his podcast has said he cannot understand why Axe and Smash are not in the WWE Hall of Fame. I don't hear him crying about them being Road Warrior knockoffs. How about Abyss as Mankind? Even Muhammad Ali, the greatest of all time, he admitted that he patterned most of his shtick after Gorgeous George. That's not exactly the same thing because Ali wasn't a wrestler, but the point is everybody borrows from someone else in wrestling. And there's a fine line between being a tribute act and not having any originality whatsoever, and also then borrowing from those that came before you. Those are two different things. You can borrow things or even pattern yourself in some ways off people that came before you without being just an out-and-out tribute act. I think LA Knight, he walks right up to that line, but he doesn't go over it. Whatever he's doing right now, he needs to do more of it, not less, because it's working. And if Kevin Nash can't see past that, that's fine for Kevin Nash. But guess what? Kevin Nash, he's not the one in the crowd at these shows popping off when they play the man's music. Kevin Nash is not the one buying the man's new t-shirt that apparently sold more than most people in the company last month. In the ring, I can't sit here and rattle off a list of great LA Knight matches that you absolutely need to go out of your way to see. He's not a flashy guy. He doesn't do anything that really stands out. He's not a technical marvel. He's more of a brawler. He's not doing flips and dives and all kinds of stuff like that. Where he shines is on the microphone. In the ring, he's good. He's not great. I enjoyed the matches he had with Cameron Grimes in NXT, and he was part of that great War Games match in NXT a couple of years ago when they did the Black and Gold crew against the 2.0 crew. I'd like to see what he can do in the ring against guys like Austin Theory and Sheamus and AJ Styles and Seth Rollins and people like that. He should have that chance. That video of him that I mentioned, the video of him beating up Death Row before SmackDown went on the air Friday night, when I checked this morning, that video had over 800,000 views. That's more than every other video they posted from the actual show on Friday night, with one exception, that being the Tribal Court segment, which is over 1 million. It has more views than even the ending of the show with Jey Uso does. And now I'm seeing there's a rumor going around that WWE could soon be using Stone Cold Steve Austin, funny enough, right? Stone Cold Steve Austin in some way on television, not necessarily in a match, but in some way to give the rub to one of the stars on the roster. I don't know if that's true, and if it is true, I don't know who that star is, but if it is true, that person should be LA Knight. Maybe that comes in the form of a promo segment together. Maybe that comes in the form of Stone Cold making an appearance where he's surrounded by some heels, and then LA Knight comes out to help, fight them off, and they share a beer. But I like it. I like the idea of doing something with him and Stone Cold. It's why I pitched LA Knight as an opponent for him at WrestleMania this year when it looked like Austin might possibly be doing another match. I just thought the promos alone would be great. but anybody with ears can hear what's going on. He told Chris Van Vliet recently, some people don't have ears. Hopefully the person making the decisions there who actually matters turns up the volume on his hearing aids.